Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. I got Bradlee Dean on, and he's a guest who's an advocate on true educational reform. And something we've been talking about, really, it seems like as long as this existed, is the abolishing of the Department of Education, which certainly has made things worse as far as education goes nationwide. It started, it was one of the couple of new departments that Jimmy Carter added to make America run better. Of course, you remember how well America ran under Jimmy Carter. And so, Bradlee Dean, before we get started on our topic, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you're doing.
Well, I run a ministry called You Can Run But You Cannot Hide International, and we've done over 342 high schools in 22 different states. And in the process of doing that, we just seen what the problem was. We see that, and we do see in the present a generation being subjected to everything and protected from nothing. So we figured we better stand up and bring it to them. And basically what Woodrow Wilson said in a nutshell is, if you don't know where you came from, how do you know where you're going? And that's exactly what the plan is. That's what the agenda is in public schools, and we want to give them a knowledge of their history.
Yeah, interesting you quote Woodrow Wilson because he's kind of the architect of the mess we have today, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely he is. Hey, love him or hate him, Kevin. Love him or hate him, he was right when he said that.
He was right when he said that, no question about it. So tell us what you're doing.
Well, right now what we're doing is we're just basically doing what we've always done, and that's to reach out to the next generation and give them a knowledge of their history. And really what I do when I'm in public schools or colleges or tea parties or churches or wherever they want me to come, I just want to give them an understanding of the price paid for their histories. And because once you begin to give them an understanding of their history and the price paid for their freedoms, I'll tell you what, you change the whole paradigm. And so when I get done doing a high school assembly, what I'll do is the first thing I'll ask the students is I'll ask them the question, so what do you guys think of the Bill of Rights? Do you know your rights? And they'll start to laugh at me, and I'll say, well, I don't know what you're laughing at. If you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights. And then the next thing I'll ask them, Kevin, is I'll say, how many in your family, your grandpas, your grandmas, your moms, your dads, your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, maybe even your brothers and sisters have fought in foreign wars to ratify the Constitution that you don't even know? And all of a sudden I have 300 to 1,800 students looking at me like a bunch of deer looking in headlights. And for the next 2.5 hours, I talk about a plethora of topics, about 25 topics, and at the very end, I'll show them the price paid for their freedoms. I'll tell them, for example, World War I, 116,516 men and women fought, bled, and died to ratify the Constitution that you don't even know. I'll bring it through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iwo Jima, Afghanistan, not in that order, and to the present. And then the next thing I'll ask them, Kevin, is I'll ask them the question, so what would you think of me if I took a can of spray paint and went to the headstones at Arlington Cemetery and said, let's just go ahead and desecrate their memories? Mm-hmm. And without fail, one of the students will stand up and say, if you do that, I'll tear your head off. And I'll say, good. Now what is it that you need to know? And then I'll tell them religion and morality are the essential pillars of civil society, and that's exactly what the first president of the United States said. So guess what they want to do? They want to read their Constitution, they want to read the Bible, and they want to know where they came from. And guess what you got? You got one converted kid that wants to stand up and fight for the freedoms that have been given to him at someone else's cost.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me exactly what your objective is now with trying to abolish the Department of Education. Why now? What in particular is upsetting to you about the Department of Education?
Well, when you look at what they're teaching kids today, if it's not International Baccalaureate, which is an educational scheme which was contrived in Sweden in 1968, to something called No Child Left Unindoctrinated, you know it as No Child Left Behind, where they're trying to level the playing fields rather than shooting for the stars, they're shooting for the floor. And then you have something called Common Core, which is a more progressive agenda. Even on top, it's gas poured on No Child Left Behind. I think my objective is just simply to get into the public arena and let them know what's going on, because once they mass exodus from public schools, it's all over for this agenda in the first place. And let me remind you of something, too, here, my friend, is the fact that 86% of those that send their kids into public schools are Christians, patriots, and or conservatives into the cesspool of indoctrination, when in fact them people that are sending their kids into public school know that the federal government is violating Article 10 of the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
And one more point, William Bennett, he was the Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan. He's the guy that said the longer that kids stay in public schools, in essence, he said the dumber they get.
Yeah.
And if you
the more like sheep they become, which is exactly what government is producing, is sheeple.
Exactly, and that's all you have to do, Kevin, is look in history and see what any dictator or tyrant attempts to do is go for the younger generation, because when you look at Mao Zedong, that's exactly what Mao Zedong did, is he went to a younger generation and he taught them that they were a democracy only to overthrow the Chinese Republic, and that's exactly what he succeeded in doing.
That's what mob rule always does, though. It always leads to the rise of tyrants. We've seen that very recently in Egypt. That's why our founding fathers wanted a republic and not mob rule.
Thank you.
So, but you and I are oddities. Most people would look at us like, what the heck did he just say? And that's the problem of our culture today is, we worship worship the altar of democracy, but Hitler was elected in 1932 in a democratic election.
Correct.
He rose to power because the Nazis received more votes than any other power, which allowed him to become the president and the Führer of Germany. And so, Alexis de Tocqueville put it best, America is great because America is good. But right. They don't remember the second part of that, which says, if Americans cease to be good, America will cease to be great. And one of the ways we stayed great was because we had rule of law rather than mob rule. And unfortunately, most people don't get it. So, Bradlee, you're way, way out on the edge, which I appreciate. I consider myself that, too. But let's face it, though, we eliminate the Department of Education, which I think is a fabulous idea. This problem, this cultural and institutional problem, now permeates state education systems around the country. Mm-hmm. To me, I don't see it making much difference. I've begun to advocate that Christians really need to take their kids out of school. Yes. We need to stop having, we should be looking for schools that are not accredited by state governments, because that means they're not propagandized schools. And we need to create a competitive alternative school system that's publicly driven, where people pay on a sliding scale and Christians invest in those children's education. I look at all of these empty churches Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. and wonder why they're not filled with school kids that are competing against the public schools.
Well, that's exactly right. And just what you just said, that's the humorous part of all this, is the fact that the state-run schools don't want anything to do with the homeschoolers, because then they know that the homeschoolers are 9 times 10 advanced more than they are in the public schools. And of course, anybody that knows anything, even the common man, knows that public schools are not a good place to have for their children. The great mystery is, what are they doing there in the first place? If you love your kids so much, get your kids out of public schools. It's all over for federal government. And I want to just tell you this too. When we read the Declaration of Independence, we see that this government derives their powers from the consent of the government. That means they work for we the people, not we them the government. The government does not have a right to break the law, friends. And when people begin to understand that liberty is only the right to do what the law permits, then they're going to begin to hold their representatives accountable for what they're doing. But I think what's so bad about what you're seeing out there is that these politicians who the American populace know are corrupt, they're the ones that are doing it to their kids in the first place. So when you look at both sides of the pendulum, there's no excuse for what's going on. If we love them, let's fight for them, and let's get them out of there.
Loved having you on. Thanks for being with us so much. Enjoyed it. Bradlee Dean, he's with sonsoflibertyradio.com. You need to be listening to this. You need to be getting your kids out of the government schools as quickly as you can, or at the very least, you need to be unusually involved with your kids to make sure you know what they're being taught. Amen. So that they can become capable adults, because right now all they're doing is being trained to be sheeple by a government that wants to keep them under control. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, when we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, you're listening to The Price of Business.